Well, good morning, everybody. Let's hope the technology works. I say that because the Times Higher Education magazine in London, it comes out every week, it said once that Ron Barnett is computer illiterate. So if things start to go awry, don't be surprised, but I'm sure we will get on all right anyway. I want to pay enormous thanks, record my enormous thanks to the organising committee, and especially Elisa, who has been absolutely fantastic, and her office in the way they've hosted me and organised my trip here. It's been absolutely exemplary, so thank you so much to everybody who's been associated with bringing me here. It's a great delight, really. What a fantastic university Wollongong has here. I really think the surroundings of a university are very, very important. You have seen one of the bylines of the conference. It's about, Lisa was challenging us to try and do some thinking around what Lisa and her committee called critical intersections. Do you remember that? Well, here are a few critical intersections for my thoughts with you this morning. Curriculum and pedagogy. What's the relationship between curriculum and pedagogy? Curriculum and education. When we think about curriculum, do we think enough about education? And what's that relationship? Pedagogy and education. When we're teaching students, when we're engaging students, what kind of educational project do we have in mind? And there would be other critical intersections, I think. Learning and academic identity. What kind of students are we hoping to form? What academic identity would we like them to take on through their learning? And then the very idea of a student in a process of becoming, and the very idea of a university. What is a university? What should a university be in the 21st century? So those are just, I think, a few, Elisa, of the critical intersections, lovely phrase, which I think my talk with you and thoughts with you this morning will open up. If you want to capture the identity of Ron Barnett in a phrase, I would say I'm a social philosopher. Before you start running for the door, when you hear the word philosophy, I'd say hang on in there, because I want to try and show you, well, reveal some of my passions about higher education and about what it is to learn. But I also want to try and develop an argument with you this morning. And my argument will take 3 stages. First part, I want to ask the question, what is it that the world needs from higher education? And then in the second part, I want to move towards and develop what we might grandly call Ron Barnett's educational theory. I want to put before you a proposal around what I call dispositions and qualities, which I want sharply to distinguish. And then I want to move in the third stage, with that almost as background, to some very, very sketchy ideas about the ecological curriculum. So that's where I want to go. I hope that sounds as if it might be of some interest. Let's just see if the clicker works. It does fantastic. And you'll see that I'm wanting to argue for 4 propositions. I want to argue that our world is unknowable in certain key respects. You'll see in brackets it says certainly the world of 2020, but have this thought that there are students now coming into higher education today who will be alive in the 22nd century. What are they going to face in their lifetimes? What kind of changes in the world are they going to encounter? What challenges, personal challenges, conceptual challenges are they going to confront and have to face? It's a world too of contested ideas, but it's not an educational free-for-all. And I want to suggest that in designing curricula today, it's still possible to work out a universal set of ideas and indeed responsibilities. That wasn't my phone going off. It happens, you know. I get very twitchy because I think, gosh, my partner's calling me or whatever. What have I done wrong? But I want to try and sketch out a set of ideas which both capture a sense of the universality of being in the world and also open up a space in which we can do justice as students, as individuals. I want to ride both horses at once. And then I want to go on from there to advance an idea of the curriculum, as I say, around what I'm calling the ecological curriculum. And I want to try and explain what I mean by that, which builds upon all of my preceding thoughts. The world of 2020, nothing new here, nothing original here. It's all aide-memoire stuff. A turbulent world. Just look at the TV, look at the news day in and day out. Not just economic crises, but crises of social integration, crises, if you want to be fancy and pompous, legitimation crises. How are we to justify ourselves in the world? Global inequalities, wars, terrorism, and so on and so forth. Environmental degradation, problems of living between the generations, across nations, across ethnicities and religions, demographic problems, and so on and so forth, and utter contestability of ideas and perspectives. And then, as I say, working that on decades, because people coming into higher education will be alive in decades to come. The point here is not just that the world is changing, but it's changing in very elusive ways. It's changing the very ideas and concepts through which we attach ourselves to the world. Does that sound terribly highfalutin and abstract? To me, it's absolutely concrete. As I stand here in front of you, so you sit there in front of me, what is it that we can hold on to? Is there anything we can hold on to? Is there any value, any concept that has any stability, any security for us whatsoever? And I say no. All of these fundamental concepts through which we live our lives, we get up in the morning, we go to work, we engage with each other, all of those fundamental concepts, ideas and values are all slippery, are all elusive, are all challenged, all contested. What is it to be a doctor in the world today? What is it to be an engineer? We cannot answer these very easy questions in any straightforward way. It's a world, therefore, not just of complexity, but of super complexity, in which the very ideas through which we attach ourselves to the world are being questioned. What are our responsibilities in the world? And yet, despite all of this elusiveness, we're still being called upon to give an account of ourselves in the world. And so the doctor who errs or doesn't come up to expectations finds herself or himself in the news. So what is needed? We need a higher education that can help students become future members of society, future members of the world. And from that very simple idea comes the observation that human beings are not merely possessors of knowledge or skills, but are beings in the world. They have their being in the world, they make their being in the world. Does all of this sound terribly abstract? It's really vital to me, absolutely fundamental in terms of where we're going, what higher education is and should be in the world. We want our students to engage with the world, seriously to engage with it, to help to try to understand it, configure it out, when there's no straightforward configuring? What stances are they to take up in the world? You can't come to a Ron Barnett seminar or lecture without hearing mention of Heidegger. I'm sure not too many of you, fortunately, worry too much about Heidegger, but he has got a wonderful vocabulary, and one of his concepts is that of comportment. How do we stand in relation to the world? How do we comport ourselves? We want our students to engage with the world, to have dispositions to engage with the world. Why do we get up in the morning? Why did you get up in the morning and come here? We don't get up in the morning and engage with the world and venture forth into the world because we've got lots of knowledge and lots of skills. We get up in the morning and engage with the world because we've got a will to engage with the world. We have a certain kind of being in the world. So it's not just a technical matter that I'm concerned about imparting knowledge and skills. No, those are important, but it's much more than that. It's thinking about what kind of beings we want our students to be as they graduate, as they move into the world. Don't we want them to become exemplary human beings? And what might that mean? So there are inadequate mantras dominating our higher education system and our higher education, quotes, debates and discussions. Knowledge, knowledge, knowledge. That was, of course, the supreme mantra of higher education for 150 years, from the early 19th century onwards. And in the last 50 years, it's given way to skills, skills, and skills. You cannot hear a politician, ministers of higher education, vice chancellors talk about what they're trying to do without hearing the whole vocabulary of skills. And now, of course, employability, employability, employability. Have you got that in Australia? We have it in the UK. We understand them, but they're inadequate to engage, to deal, to cope with the challenges that I'm trying to sketch out in front of us. And we've seen this huge shift across the world towards skills, towards picturing higher education as a space for the acquisition of skills. It is, to use another pompous concept, a lurch towards performativity. The problem with all of this, there are several problems, and they are as I've listed them. First of all, neither my knowledge and my skills for today may be adequate for tomorrow. Secondly, I may have all the knowledge and skills in the world, but I might not be inclined to use them. I might just be lazy. I might be rather tired. I might be suffering from jet lag. But more importantly, I might have them and I might use them, but I might use them inappropriately. I might use them in pernicious ways. And these are real matters for the doctor. Under what circumstances should the doctor use her or his skills? And that's not a question that can be answered with a vocabulary of knowledge and skills. We answer those questions through a vocabulary of values, of concern. And then the world may change even as I acquire my skills and my knowledge. So there's an instability here against which knowledge and skills may be inadequate. And hopefully, last point, there is a world beyond the world of work. Do you talk about, are we allowed to talk about work-life balance these days? My partner keeps trying to tell me there is such a thing. And I'm supposed to be retired. I've had the privilege of interviewing students. Basically, I just sit in front of a computer and try and find words to answer that blinking cursor on the screen in front of me. But occasionally, I've had the privilege of interviewing students, and it really is an extraordinary privilege to sit down with a student. You have a room assigned, and the student will come in, you introduce yourself, and if things are going well in that so-called interview, which is an extraordinary encounter in a space, the student will open themselves out. And here are two students, different universities. Beginning the student journey is an entry into a scary, exciting and fascinating world. We need self-belief to survive and prosper. I remember thinking, this is amazing, exciting, exhilarating and downright terrifying. Working with a complex world is about not giving up when you feel overwhelmed. So that's one student. Another student, another university, quite different university. What's fascinating about Alison's courses is the amount of panic, that surrounds the essays, and I felt it personally. It was a very, very scary thing to do because there were no right answers. I think these quotations are absolutely fascinating. I don't know how you respond to them. You have a sense of students struggling with challenge, with difficulty, becoming unsettled, but coming through, finding exhilaration. These are not student experiences that can be captured by the weasel word of our time, student satisfaction. We have here strangeness, awkwardness, stretching, challenge, difficulty. Do you notice both of those students, as I say, different students, different universities, both of them use the word scary. Are we doing that in our universities today? Dare we do that with our students today? Are we stretching them into challenging situations, bringing them out of themselves? This is a higher education, not just of knowledge or skills, but it's about human being, the formation and development of human being, and human beings opening themselves up to a challenging and difficult world. And so we move to this schema on the basis of what I've said already. I want to conceive with you of a higher education in a very simple way. I'm a very simple person. I can only manage simple diagrams. Knowledge, acting, and being. 3 interlocking circles, overlapping circles. The knowing is important. The acting, the acquisition of the skills of putting them into the world, action, is important. But so too is the being of the student. It's the student as a person who puts knowledge and action into the world. So a curriculum, as I see it, will have these 3 elements. But you'll see the circles take on different sizes. The question is, how might we, if we're doing the social science bit and going and looking at the curriculum in engineering, in business economics, in health, whatever it is, what would it look like? How would we compare the disciplines? We would see that the circles differ. They differ in their size, they differ in their relationships, they differ in their relationships with each other. Characteristically, the sciences, the hard sciences, focus very heavily on knowledge. The professional fields focus very heavily on the acting, on being in the world. And the creative arts, the humanities, give more ground to the student as a human being. But all of those 3 circles should be there in some way or other. And the question is, how do they relate to each other? How should they relate to each other? Another student. The linguist's tale. I've always had a huge passion for languages, the student said to me, but coming to this university, ancient university in England, so it rather cuts it down a bit, I found the French and Italian departments very different, and I did start to feel a bit bitter towards French. I wasn't enjoying that anymore. I loved it at school more than Italian, but here I found the French department very rigid. I felt like I was back in school and not even in the 6th form. I didn't feel very free to express myself in the lessons. With the Italian department, though, we all sit around a big table or chairs without tables in front. There will be a lot more interaction, more friendly, just a liberating atmosphere. French and Italian, probably in the same building. Probably their corridors were next to each other or one on the top of the other. We used to have academic national audit in the UK called subject review, and each department would be reviewed by the National Body Quality Assurance Agency and would be given a score of 1 to 4 on 6 parameters. So if you did really well, you could get a score of 24. You can bet your boots that both of these departments scored 24. But the pedagogical relationship, the student experience, profoundly different if this student is anything to go by. And on paper, you can bet your boots too, the curricula of both departments look fantastic, world famous, world leading, you know all the jargon, academics doing the teaching, but the student experience profoundly different. That's one set of reflections. The other is to ask the question, which is more important then, pedagogy or curriculum? Is what you're teaching more important, or is it how you teach it? Is it that connection that you form with students and the space you open out for the students? The curriculum comes alive in pedagogical spaces. We need to bring pedagogy and curriculum together. They're both profoundly important, and their relationship is very important. So against this kind of background, a sense that the world presents us with considerable challenges, and we're looking to help students to develop in ways that can help them live purposively in a changing and challenged world, to become human beings of certain kinds. Across the world, we've been searching for a new kind of language. We've been dimly aware that knowledge and skills actually are not enough. And we've had a language of graduate attributes and graduateness. Have you come across those phrases? And you've probably got others in Australia, or even in Wollongong. Well, my suggestion is dispositions and qualities. What do I mean by dispositions and qualities? Dispositions. 6 dispositions. Dispositions for a world of challenge. A will to learn, to engage, to listen, to explore, to hold oneself open to experiences and to keep going forward. Don't you feel that those 6 dispositions are really part of the story that I've been trying to weave with you this morning already? They're part of, as it were, the equipment, the human equipment we need in order to keep going in a challenging and difficult age where everything is up for grabs. 6 dispositions for a world of challenge. So hang on to those. And here are some qualities. Qualities for a world of challenge. And you'll notice the little bit in parentheses right down the bottom. The qualities are extendable. The qualities are, as it were, what we try to remember when Mary and John come to us 5 years after they've left and they ask us for a reference. And we try and recall what Mary and John were like. We try and recall their qualities. And it's the qualities that distinguishes Mary from John. So, how do I want to distinguish these? I've already given an intimation of how I distinguish between them. I want to say we're not seriously in the business, if I can use that term, the business of higher education. A course is not a course of higher education unless it is sustaining and helping the student to develop these 6 dispositions. These 6 dispositions are necessary parts of how I construe a higher education. But the qualities are much more optional, are much more extendable, and they would differ characteristically across disciplines, across courses, but they will also differ, and this is the profound point here, they would differ across individual students. So John and Mary have been taking the same course in civil engineering, but they would develop somewhat different sets of qualities despite having gone through the same experience. Don't we find that? That the students in front of us are individuals, and they'll be taking on different experiences within the same penumbra of experiences that we think we're offering them. So it's a nice task, and perhaps you've done this in your course teams, in engineering, in business, in economics, in mathematics. What qualities are you hoping the students will take on? Talk to your colleagues about it. Have an away day. Have an away day. Think through which qualities you're hoping they might develop. And you will differ. You will differ in the course team. You will have your own values. Bring them out into the open. What is it you're hoping to do with your students? But don't forget these, I'm going back, the 6 dispositions are the foundations. It's they that help us get up in the morning to take on a crazy world when we don't know what's going to happen to us day by day. Dispositions and qualities. So how do we encourage the dispositions and the student's own qualities? Here's another student, an interview that I had with a student. You're writing an essay, I've said to the student, you've done your research. You've more or less got an idea of what you want to say. You've got to perhaps argue for something to develop a point of view. How does that feel when you know that this is probably quite original and it's you that's speaking? And the student said to me, it's really exciting, and at the same time you're thinking, would anybody agree with this? In that way, sometimes it's safer to stick to the literary criticism. The student was in English, doing English. Sometimes safer to stick to the literary criticism. In other words, what's already been said, and express the critic's point of view, and to put your own point forward against that. So here we have questions of authenticity, of originality, of boldness, of courage. Are we helping our students to become courageous, to form their own point of view in a turbulent and challenging world? And this was a student, again, in a world-class university, having doubts about their own capacities to be bold and brave. Do we not now, these days, lurch unwittingly towards a pedagogy of safety rather than a pedagogy of risk? Do we not sometimes conspire with our students? We want an easy life. The students want an easy life. They want in England, they want their 2-1s. Actually, we had some data yesterday. Actually, the data are now that nearly 70% of students getting 2-1s or first-class degrees in the UK. It's an expectation now that when the students come to a UK university, they will emerge with their 2-1s. A pedagogy of safety. We're all moving in the same direction. But which direction? The idea of the ecological. Some very sketchy thoughts. Given all this, given the background, changing, challenging world, what kind of curriculum might we try and work towards? Felix Guattari, modern philosopher, had a little book called The 3 Ecologies of the environment, social relations, and human subjectivity. That's okay, but we need to go further. There are other ecologies. Knowledge ecology, ecologies of the natural environment, yes, but ecologies of the social environment, ecologies of culture, yes, ecologies of the economy. So, and these are all interconnected now in this little global world, the interconnectedness of things. We need to be conscious of that to help students develop, to use his very nice phrase, an ecosophical perspective, a sense of belonging, a sense of connectedness. And so we're led to what we might call an ecology of the imaginary. What would it mean to imagine now afresh a curriculum for a global world, for the world in which we are all interconnected? It will be an ecosophy at once applied and theoretical, ethico-political and aesthetic. Big abstract words, but don't they mean something? What does it mean for a student these days to become a human being and a real person in a global world, helping the world forward? And the ecologists have this idea of deep ecology. Deep ecology refers to the idea not just that there is a world out there that we need to be conscious of and sensitive to, but it refers to the sense that we are part of the world. We are partly cause many of the problems in the world as well. The ecological curriculum, what would it look like? It would help to promote the student's being in the world, a sense of interconnectedness, the student's engagement with the world. Are we doing this? The ecologists go on a great deal about sustainability. I want to say that's not enough. We want our students to help to improve the world, to take the world forward in some ways, to have a care for the world. Yes, to become a global citizen, another big phrase of our time, still yet, in my view, to be cashed out, to be given substance. A student who can have empathy for the world. I loved the introduction we had yesterday, if I can say so, reminding us of different traditions, different cultures, different ways of engaging with the world. We saturate students with our westernized knowledges, the westernized ideas of fixing on the world out there and controlling it. The introduction we had yesterday reminds us of other ways of knowing the world, of being sensitive to the world, and empathy for the world. And so this kind of curriculum will contain spaces for reflection. All too often we load stuff onto the students these days without giving them pause, giving them space to reflect. Interdisciplinarity, bringing subjects and disciplines together and allowing students to see connections. 100 years ago, I took my own first degree in philosophy, psychology, and sociology. Were any connections made between them? No. Can we help students to make connections? It was an absolutely lost opportunity. Are we doing enough to help students? If we're not doing it here, how can they make these connections in the wider world? A demanding set of experiences. The ecological graduate. Self-sustaining, yes, but doing much more. Pushing themselves into difficult spaces, engaging in new ways, and on different levels. Do you know the work of Simon Marginson? Was in Australia at Melbourne, now has come to University College London. But he's coined this rather ungainly term, but it's quite nice in a way, glonacal. We've all heard of global and local combined, but Simon wants to introduce a third dimension of national. So global, national, and local, put the three together. Isn't this what we want of our students? We want them to have a sensitivity on all of these different levels and horizontally, different regimes of the world, to look at the news, to look at what's going on in Europe, in Asia, in other parts of the world, to feel that they have a connection with that, and not just to see and feel it's beyond them. A care and concern towards the world. And then responsibilities. Do we ever hear the very concept of responsibility these days in relation to higher education and the university? The French theorist Derrida raised this issue, and because of his postmodern, post-structuralist situation, wasn't able to answer the question he'd set himself. What is the responsibility, or might be the responsibility, of a university in the 21st century? It's a profound question, it seems to me, and we need to have answers to it. We need not to be shy of bringing in concepts of the concept of responsibility into our thinking about the curriculum and about student learning. The ecological graduate works in the interests for the world, interests of the world. Can we do that? Is it pie in the sky? Is it Ron Barnett wittering on in his fanciful, philosophical way in the morning? Or is this real? To me, it's very real. We have these responsibilities in the world today, and we can help our students, and we're doing that. We're doing it without realizing it. The student as global citizen. Well, there's been mention of University College London. I only put it up not because I'm associated with those developments at all, but it's fantastic what's going on there. Huge university, 30,000 students, 18,000 postgraduate students, tremendous amount going on. UCL is now constructing itself as a university of wisdom. How about that? Why wisdom? They're picking up on the work of Nick Maxwell. Nick Maxwell happened to be a former academic at UCL. Was rather unhappy then, took early retirement. He was in the history and philosophy of science. He's been fighting a one-person battle for 30 years, writing books about the idea of wisdom and how we in the educational world should pick up on the idea of wisdom. And now, rather belatedly, you might say, University College London is doing just that. But it's developing all sorts of other ideas around the student as a global citizen, around what it's calling the connected curriculum. We need to think big. We should think big. Universities are global institutions. Are they living out, are they fulfilling their potential in this extraordinarily challenging world and helping the world to become a better place? We need relational thinking, as it's been termed, and yet some detachment. Universities are remarkable spaces. They're supposed to be spaces of critical thinking. We can only engage in critical thinking if we have space to do so, and if we're simply caught up in the agendas of the world and fulfilling what the world is asking of us, we won't have the space for critical thinking. So we need to have an eye to that as well. But bringing the student into the world, into a collision with the world, we can do it these days in ways we couldn't have done it before. With new technology, we don't have to, some universities are trying to get their students to go to other countries. And we've been very bad at that in the UK. The world comes to us and our students hardly go to other countries. But with modern technology, we can bring the world into the classroom in astonishing ways. We can go into the museums and the galleries of the world from the classroom. We can hook up with another classroom. Say you've got a class in civil engineering. You can hook up with another class in civil engineering. Talk about what the role of an engineer is in another society. Get the students thinking and talking about these other experiences. The student as global citizen. We need to be more imaginative and can be much more imaginative about what we're doing. Well, I think at Wollongong, perhaps you don't have too much in the way of the humanities question. But it's a big issue around the world. What is to be the fate of the humanities? America and other countries, it's a real big hot debate. Japan has just said it's not going to invest any more in the humanities. Can you imagine a world of higher education without the humanities? I won't detain us here thinking about that today, except notice what I've said down here towards the end, writing in different idioms. Are we getting students to write in different ways? for different audiences, to bring them out of themselves, to think about the other, to reach out to different audiences. Isn't this what writing is all about? It's not just for the humanities. Ecologies of living. Is all of this pie in the sky? And then lastly, communication skills. Can I be forgiven for having a last slide on this matter with you? Communication skills. You've seen the way my mind is working, my argument has been going. Skills are important, but they're not enough. When I'm writing, I'm passionate about writing. I see myself as a writer before anything else. Not an academic writer, a writer who happens to be an academic. And so skills are very important to me. Where does the comma go? Does it come before the and or after the and? What is the logic of this sentence? So the skills are important, but they have their place only in virtue of my wanting to write and my wanting to reach out to audiences. How is it that these extraordinary configurations, these extraordinary marks on a screen, these extraordinary marks in a book we call words and language, can reach out to people across the world? How is that possible? To other countries, to other cultures, other nations. It works because the writer has a concern for an audience, and therefore has a concern for this audience or that audience, and therefore can write in different ways for different audiences. Are we thinking about that when we think about writing? It's not just a matter of skill, it's a matter of disposition. Going back to my very term disposition. Do I have a concern to reach out to a potential reader? Will the reader want to read on? Will the reader want to turn the page? Can I hook the reader? Can I delight the reader? Can I disturb the reader? I'm sorry, I'm liable to lurch off into another talk. But writing is so important today. So important. If we're going to connect with each other, we have to reach out to each other, partly through our writing. Yes, it's very important. Worldly reaching out. The commas matter, but woods and trees matter, the big picture. So conclusions. We need spaces, not just for knowledge and skills, they are important, but we need more than ever spaces for students to become themselves, to see themselves in new ways, to disturb them, to make life awkward for them, but yet to bring them into a place where they can see connections between themselves and other people, other situations in the world, and to help them want to do so. We need a new kind of language in higher education, of otherness, of care, of being, of becoming, of connectivity. We need to, yes, allow students the spaces to develop their own qualities, but also we need to develop those dispositions for a world of challenge and difficulty. And this means the pedagogy itself needs to stimulate and make life a little bit awkward for students. One of my books, I had at the front a photograph of the young man in South Sea Island hurtling off the platform. It's a kind of ritual they have. And they hurtle down from the platform with thongs attached to their ankles, and their shoulders are supposed to brush the ground. There's risk here. Can we encourage our students to throw themselves off the platform? Can they have that courage to go into a difficult space? Are we wanting them to do so? This is absolutely crucial for a higher education for a 21st century. To see connections, to engage, to be bold, to be brave. This is ultimately an ecological curriculum, connecting oneself in new spaces with the world. What are its prospects? Is it Ron Barnett pie in the sky, or can we realise it? Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you. The question is about the limitations of skills. How do we understand skills?
Yes, so I think, oh no, sorry. So skills as I understand it, in the way that I'm looking at things from an academic citizen perspective, viewing language as a complex set of social practices, just I think what you're saying is there needs to be more connectedness and care if we're to work forward into new futures and new imaginaries.
Yeah.
But the word skills is quite reductive
Yes.
in terms of language, and
Yeah.
it might actually,
Yeah.
that word being
Yes.
quite contested in itself
Yes.
will reduce the possibility of the ecological curriculum.
Yes.
Maybe
Yeah. Yeah.
was on that.
Yeah. Well, as I was saying, I don't want to rubbish skills. Skills have their place. I'm going to get on the plane tomorrow for London. I hope I will make it. And I'm going to depend on skills of a lot of people. And as I say, I think as a writer, I have developed a lot of skill. And hopefully in all sorts of other ways as well. So skills are not to be rubbished, and nor is knowledge to be rubbished. But I want to just say that in themselves they are inadequate, and even when put together they are inadequate. But there's a lot of work that one can do on the very concept of skill. As I say, if you go to a concert and you hear a classical pianist play a piano concerto, you'd like to feel that most of the notes are there and in the right order, as Eric Morecambe said at once. But is it crucial that every note is there? And then there are issues about tone, about much more, about feel, and so on and so forth, when ultimately talk about skills becomes inadequate. And ultimately we're led into other concepts of emotion, of communication, of value, of understanding. The very term understanding has fallen out of our language in higher education. We used to talk about knowledge and understanding when I was a student, but now we don't need students to understand. And sorry, I'm lurching on. Critical thinking, the very phrase critical thinking, is also disappearing from our lexicon. Why is that? Well, we know why it is. Because we're being urged in the direction of rather narrow conceptions of skills.
It's fascinating. In my 5-minute lecture yesterday, about 2 minutes were devoted to everything you were saying today, and I tried to do. I'm wondering, I was trying to persuade various vice chancellors about dispositions to do something in terms of critical thinking, maybe ethics. Have you got any advice how that might be more than, they tend to agree and think it's a great idea, but then never actually get through it?
Sorry, thank you. Question is about actually developing a rich concept of critical thinking as I understood it, and having a sense of an ethical dimension to critical thinking itself. And I think that's absolutely fascinating. And I haven't, although I've actually written a book about critical thinking and just edited a global reader on critical thinking, I think this dimension of critical thinking having an ethical dimension is one that I've not given enough attention to, and I want to think about that. But it gives me the chance of saying that we need a rich concept of critical thinking. Critical thinking, insofar as it is available to us in higher education these days, has been reduced, has been narrowed to sets of skills. Whereas, to use my vocabulary, fundamentally, critical thinking is about dispositions. Do I have a disposition to care about the world, to stand back from the world, to engage with the world, to critique the world? Being critical calls also for qualities. It calls for qualities of courage, qualities of having a distance from the world. So the dispositions and qualities are central to filling out an adequate notion of critical thinking. We need to do some critical thinking about critical thinking.
Okay, well, there's just 15 minutes of morning tea left. I'm happy to keep going. If you want to ask questions, if you like, the other one to be
Thank you. This is quite interesting being a parent of young children. I've actually given a lot of these ideas a lot of thought myself, wondering how to prepare my own children. But with the students, like my children, I often use this, I feel like I use this argument. You know, where I can put this in front of them. I can have this talk with the students and my children. But, you know, they have they can go, yeah, that's great. It sounds really interesting, but I've got more immediate goals that I need to satisfy. Maybe this is going back to what this gentleman said about having a broader program. If that's not going to happen, how do we, convince our students that this is actually worth their while? And they're going, I just got to get through my science.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't put any or much of this in front of students. I think you will to play the game a bit cleverly here. And you see the best of teachers and course teams doing just this. That they will orchestrate a set of experiences. They will bring the world into the classroom. They don't say, we're going to give you an ecological experience, but they just get on and do it. And then the whole thing comes alive, or can come alive. And students come into all sorts of new ideas and new spaces, new experiences, and you get them talking together. You know, students are a great resource if we can get them engaging with each other in the context and in the company of these experiences we can open out to them. So we just need to play it a bit cleverly, and I think many these days are. Probably one more, and that's it.
Yeah. So,
my question is to do with, I think it's all really fantastic. I'm very inspired by this, but my question is, how do we, when we get there, how do we know that we've done this with our students? And how do they know that this is
Okay. Thank you. If I come to your degree ceremony, and I've had the privilege of being in degree ceremonies, and you know what it's like. I'm sure you have really nice, fancy degree ceremonies at Wollongong, do you? And everybody gets dolled up in their academic dress and looks like Father Christmas and all the rest of it. And then after the formal ceremony, typically there will be a tea and buns session where proud parents get introduced to tutors. And if things have gone really well, have you not heard this? Students won't say in front of proud parents and tutors, being here has been wonderful, I've learned a lot of things, or being here has been wonderful, I've acquired lots of skill. They don't say that. What they say is, it's been wonderful being here, it's changed my life. And the extraordinary thing is about higher education, we've been at it in the Western world for 800 years. And until my theory of higher education, we had no conception of how it is we've achieved what we're doing. We actually do it, in other words. And we recognize it when we see it. And the students themselves know it. They feel it. They know that they've come into a new place, a new space, as a result of 3 or 4 years at a university, when it's gone well. The problem is, of course, all too often it doesn't go so well. And the non-completion rates are going up across the world, partly because of the instrumentalization and the narrowing and the limitation of the experience that we're now offering our students. We're being sucked into these ghastly agendas, learning outcomes, performativity, skills. You know it all. We can do much more, and brave souls are doing much more, day in and day out, unheralded, almost unnoticed. And students are being transformed to become exemplary citizens for a better world, and are going to help bring that better world about. Thank you very, very much for listening to me.